Ashley, first tell me, do you think these charges are kind of like a holdover, if you will, something in the meantime before investigators can get to homicide charges?
100%. I think it's just a matter of time. Obviously, child abandonment wasn't working anymore because the police produced the children. So this will hold her at least for now. And make no mistake, there's so much information in these affidavits, and this isn't even the whole picture.
Absolutely not. And we went through some of it in our last hour, but there's so much more, so many lies that this woman told. She lied about having cancer, which might have been the worst of them, lied about where the kids were. I mean, you name it, she lied about it. But if we could talk a little bit more about some of these things detailed, and they were detailed in the affidavit. You've been combing through it all so carefully and meticulously. Tell me about the detective and how he authored this and what seems almost kind of personal in writing about when these children's remains were uncovered.
Yeah, I think this has been really hard for the detectives in Rexburg. And if you read the affidavit that was authored by Detective Ron Ball, who's been leading this effort, he speaks in first person about having seen the remains of J.J. Vallow before he had been taken out of the garbage bags and duct tape that he'd been buried in. And as I read through the affidavit, I felt very sorry for this detective having to sort of see this scene. And I just want to read why that is, so you'll understand that. Listen, I know police are really under the microscope right now, but people should remember that they have to do this stuff too. So let me just read this. It's from paragraph 57 in the affidavit. And it says, on June 11, 2020, I observed the autopsy of the body described in paragraphs 4450. That's JJ. The body had not yet been removed from the plastic covering it was found in. As the body was uncovered and the face exposed, it was clear to me that this was the body of J.J. Vallow. The body was well preserved. While I had never met J.J. Vallow during his life, I was familiar with his face due to seeing many pictures and videos of him. I was further familiar with his haircut in the pictures I had seen of him in Yellowstone, which was shaved on the sides and back and longer on the top. JJ was further identified by Brandon Boudreau, who was shown an autopsy photograph of the body and face and was able to verify the remains were JJ. And for those viewers right now, you'll recognize that name because Lori Vallow has a niece named Melanie. She was Melanie Boudreau. She divorced Brandon Boudreau and got remarried and moved to Rexburg right beside Lori, in fact, during all of this. And Brandon is that ex-husband who ultimately the Rexburg police showed a photograph of those remains to so that he could positively identify them.
Yes. And how sad is that? I mean, this whole thing is so heartbreaking, Ashley. I know it breaks your heart as it does mine and the hearts of all of our wonderful viewers. And I was thinking about just that fact, the fact that this child's body was identified by a man who married in to the family, not blood. He was also one of the cooperators, too, by the way, wore a wire, recorded some conversations of Call It Mom and Mr. Doomsday. And how sad is it that this child's parents didn't identify him? Because, mom's locked up and might be accused of his death down the road if investigators can get there. And then dad is dead. Who knows if the way he died, well, we know we've certainly analyzed it time and time again. We think it's quite possibly very suspicious, and who knows if that'll be re-examined. We know that's being looking at now.
Well, it is open.
Yeah.
It's open. I spoke to those investigators in Arizona, and they said 100%. This is a murder investigation. It is not a self-defense investigation. That was crystal clear. And by the way, it just sort of stuck in my craw that right at the top of that statement, the body was well preserved. That's sad, but it's also really helpful because if JJ's body, don't forget, Idaho's cold. He was buried throughout the winter months. If JJ's body was well preserved, then that will be a boon to the forensics investigators. Thank God.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. If there is something that may be helpful about his condition, that is certainly it, Ashley. And then with Tylee, we're looking at a very different story, aren't we?
We knew it was going to be a different story, right, Julie? Because we remember from the beginning, egregiously concealed. What could that mean? We theorized, since it was near a fire pit, that maybe that meant burned remains, and definitely it did. And we theorized that idiot criminals who think they watch CSI and know how to do things actually don't. That may have played out here as well, because Tylee was partially burned. and they didn't get through all of it. But there's something new in the affidavits today that we weren't 100% sure of before, and that was that Tylee was also dismembered. That will also be a boon, hopefully, to investigators who can look at tool marks that may have been used to dismember her and match those to tools that might be in the possession of these three alleged conspirators. Let me read, though, from the affidavit, because there's other really important information that was new. On June 11th, again, this is Lieutenant Ron Ball. On June 11th, 2020, I also observed the autopsy of the human remains described in paragraphs 51 to 55. That's Tylee. It was not possible to identify those remains by simply looking at them, as they were too damaged by fire and dismemberment and no longer had any recognizable features. However, Dr. Glenn Smith, an orthodontist and deputy coroner in the Ada County Coroner's Office, was able to identify these remains as belonging to Tylee Ryan by matching an irregular jawline with an X-ray of Tylee when she was alive. Despite identifying Tylee, law enforcement was advised that it would still be wise to obtain a DNA verification. And this is important, Julie. We were informed that sufficient soft tissue existed, which was not burned, that we would be able to test the DNA. We are in the process of having said test performed. So again, there is some forensic material left over from those who tried to destroy and reduce Tylee to ashes. They weren't successful, and it may come back to bite them. Certainly those forensic tests will be looking for all sorts of things, including what may have rendered them incapable to breathe or incapable to fight back, those kinds of things. So yes. I'm glad to hear that there's something they can test with her remains.
Absolutely, Ashley. And one of those individuals who investigators are saying is responsible for conspiring in this whole sick mess to conceal, destroy those children's remains is Uncle Alex Cox, a suspicious character to us all along. You've been really digging deep into this today. What more are we learning about him, please?
You know, I pieced through dozens and dozens of pages of the affidavits, and they're all sort of jumbled up in terms of timeline, but I put them together into a timeline so that you can see minute by minute in the dark shadows of night what this skulking Frankenstein-like character was doing. And it is horrifying to think that this is those children's uncle. Uncle Alex is revolting. And I say that as a journalist because I have actually read these documents and what the police have found. And I wanted you to see the timeline, minute by minute, of what he did in the last moments of those child's lives.
On September 8th, Lori, her son JJ, her daughter Tylee, and Uncle Alex Cox take a trip to Yellowstone Park for the day. Alex's GPS and cell phone are tracked the whole way. At 6:40 p.m., they leave Yellowstone via the west entrance. At 6:45 p.m., Alex's phone is at a restaurant called Buckaroo's Barbecue Grill in West Yellowstone. Maybe they're picking up dinner. The stay is just 17 minutes long. By 8:37 that night, Alex Cox is back in Rexburg at Lori's apartment. He is there until 9:35 p.m. Between 9:43 and 9:53 p.m., Alex travels to a nearby gas station. And by 10:44 p.m., he is back in Lori's apartment and stays about a half hour more until 11:15 p.m. At 11:44 p.m., Alex Cox is back in his own apartment. But something happens that night of September the 8th going into September the 9th. In the dark hours between 2:42 and 3:37 a.m., Alex appears to go back to Lori's apartment and stays there for almost 1 full hour. At 4:37 a.m., Alex is back in his own apartment until almost 9 a.m., a little over 4.5 hours. It is the only time in September that Alex is tracked at Lori's apartment in the middle of the night. By 9:21 a.m. the next morning, on September the 9th, Alex now appears to travel to Chad Daybell's house, outside, at the east end of the barn, on top of the Daybell's pet cemetery. Uncle Alex is there for almost 2.5 hours at the exact location where Tylee's remains would be unearthed 9 months later. On Wednesday, September 18th, 10 days since Tylee was last seen alive at Yellowstone, a babysitter meets Lori and JJ to discuss ongoing employment. The next day, Thursday, September 19th, that babysitter watched JJ and was hired by Lori to continue the job. Also, on this same day, Lori's friend from Arizona, Melanie Gibb, and her boyfriend David Warwick come to visit for the weekend. Melanie tells police that shortly after arriving, Lori tells her that JJ had become a zombie. The same thing that Lori had said about her now dead ex-husband, Charles Vallow. Melanie tells the police that she'd seen Chad explaining this theory to Lori before. 3 days later, on Sunday night, September 22nd, exactly 2 weeks after Tylee disappears, Melanie and her boyfriend David witness JJ acting up. Melanie tells police that she and Lori and David had planned to do a podcast and that Uncle Alex Cox agreed to take JJ to his apartment. Late that same Sunday night, Melanie and David witness Uncle Alex returning to Lori's apartment carrying JJ, who appeared to be fast asleep. They say JJ's head was on Alex's shoulder, and at the time, they believed that it was a tender moment. The next morning, September 23rd, between 8 and 9 a.m., David wakes up and asks Lori where JJ is. David tells police that Lori says JJ had been rambunctious, climbing the walls, and that Uncle Alex had come to take him. 1 hour later, between 9:55 and 10:12 a.m., Uncle Alex appears once again to be back on Chad Daybell's property, but this time at the northern edge, near the pond. He stays just 17 minutes, but it is the exact location where 8.5 months later, on June 9th, police would discover JJ's buried remains, wrapped in garbage bags. Later that same morning, on September 23rd, Melanie and her boyfriend wrap up their visit and leave Lori's home. The next day, September 24th, the babysitter checks in, but tells police that Lori says her services are no longer needed and that JJ had, quote, gone to stay with his grandma. 1 day later, September 25th, between 10:05 a.m. and 10:22 a.m., Alex Cox appears again to be on Chad Daybell's property. This time, it's inside the house. He stays just 17 minutes.
That should give you a pretty good indication of what Uncle Alex was like before he himself died mysteriously, and only 1 day after they exhumed Tammy Daybell's remains. That was on December 12th. But also, Julie, what's really important is that 2 days before the Yellowstone trip, before the last time we ever saw Tylee alive, likely actually the last 24 hours of Tylee's life, 2 days before that, he was also pinging at Chad's house, inside the house. And yet again, it was a very short period of time. So whether that meant that Uncle Alex was over 2 days before Yellowstone planning all of this, I don't know, you tell me. It's pretty hard to dig a grave as big as they dug in that pet cemetery and just do that all in the requisite number of hours that were listed in the affidavit. And I should also mention that stupid text that Chad sent to his wife. Gosh, I had to burn a lot of brush this morning, dear, and I shot a raccoon and buried him in the pet cemetery, dear. I'm off to go and write, I love you, dear. Well, that was also bull, because there was no raccoon unearthed. That's also in the new affidavit. Dogs and cats in the pet cemetery, yes. And Tylee, yes, but no raccoon.
Well, just one more lie in Tammy Daybell's death, still being investigated, like Charles Vallow's death. Ashley, that piece was excellent, and certainly it's what prosecutors are going to have to do, I bet, in a courtroom pretty soon. Ashley Banfield, thank you so much for all of your analysis and reporting tonight.